Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. The scent of lilies. It's been 6 months since Amelia passed, and the scent of her favorite perfume, delicate lilies with a hint of vanilla, still lingers in our home. At first, it was a comfort. It was like she was still here with me, watching over our house as she always did. The scent clung to the pillows, drifted from her wardrobe, and settled in the corners of rooms she loved the most. Grief made me believe that maybe, in some small way, Amelia had left a part of herself behind, a sweet reminder that she hadn't entirely gone. But as time passed, the fragrance became more than a memory. It grew stronger, more insistent, like an invisible presence following me. It wasn't just in our home anymore. I caught whiffs of it in the car, at work, and even during my morning walks. It always started as a subtle note, just enough to catch my attention, before blooming into the full, overwhelming scent that had once belonged to Amelia alone. At first, I told myself it was just a trick of the mind, the remnants of her perfume still clinging to my clothes, or perhaps my imagination playing cruel tricks on me. Then, one evening, as I sat in our living room surrounded by shadows and memories, I felt the air grow thick with that familiar fragrance. It wasn't just in one room now, it permeated the entire house, suffocating in its intensity. I tried to distract myself, to focus on the book in my hands, but the words blurred as the scent enveloped me, demanding my attention. I called out her name, almost involuntarily, hoping for an answer I knew would never come. The silence that followed was absolute, and yet, I felt watched. The first time the perfume followed me out of the house, I was at the grocery store, mindlessly picking up items, my thoughts far away. Suddenly, the scent washed over me, as if someone had uncorked a bottle of Amelia's perfume right beside me. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I glanced around, searching for some explanation, but the aisle was empty. Panic clawed at my chest. I quickly paid for my groceries and rushed out, but the scent clung to me all the way home. That night, I dreamt of Amelia. She stood at the foot of our bed, shrouded in darkness, her face obscured. The only thing clear in the dream was the smell of lilies, strong and suffocating. Her presence was no longer comforting, it was oppressive, frightening. I woke up drenched in sweat, the scent still heavy in the room. The clock read 3:33 a.m., and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I checked the house, but everything was as it should be, except for the smell. It was everywhere, no longer sweet, but cloying, almost rotten. As I lay back in bed, trying to rationalize what was happening, a thought crept into my mind, unbidden and terrifying. What if this wasn't Amelia at all? What if something else was using her scent, something that wanted me to believe she was still here, but with intentions far darker? I turned on every light in the house that night, but no amount of brightness could chase away the shadows gathering in my mind. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. I started avoiding the places where the scent seemed strongest, Amelia's favorite chair by the window, the dining table where we had shared countless meals, and especially our bedroom. The smell of lilies was no longer a reminder of love, but a sinister presence that filled every corner of my life. I began sleeping on the couch, the television on all night, trying to drown out the quiet that had become far too loud. Yet, no matter where I went or how hard I tried to escape it, the scent found me. I confided in my friend Mark one evening over drinks. He was the kind of friend who'd seen me through the worst of times and never judged. He listened, his face unreadable, as I described the strange occurrences. "You think it's her?" he asked cautiously. "You think Amelia's trying to communicate?" His words made me uncomfortable. I had considered it, of course, but the thought of Amelia trying to reach out from beyond the grave filled me with a fear I couldn't articulate. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it doesn't feel like her, Mark. It feels wrong." Mark suggested I see a therapist, someone who could help me deal with my grief, someone who might offer a rational explanation for what I was experiencing. I agreed, though reluctantly, and made an appointment. The therapist was kind, her office filled with the comforting scent of lavender, but as I spoke to her, the familiar smell of lilies began to seep into the room, creeping into my awareness like an unwelcome guest. I could barely focus on her questions, my mind swirling with fear as the scent grew stronger, more pervasive. By the end of the session, I was dizzy with it, my hands trembling as I left her office. Walking home, I felt a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet, and the shadows seemed longer, deeper. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the smell wasn't following me, that I wasn't being watched. But as I turned the corner onto my street, the scent of lilies washed over me in a wave so powerful I nearly stumbled. I looked around, my heart pounding, but the street was empty. I hurried to my front door, fumbling with the keys, desperate to get inside, away from whatever was out there, or in here. Once inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The house was dark, except for the dim glow of the kitchen light. I had left it on when I went out, a small comfort against the encroaching dread. But as I moved through the hallway, the scent grew stronger, more overwhelming than ever before. It was coming from the kitchen. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself to move, to confront whatever was waiting for me. When I reached the kitchen, I saw her, Amelia. She was standing by the counter, her back to me, the soft glow of the light casting a shadow on the wall. For a moment, my heart leaped with a strange, irrational hope. "Amelia?" I called out, my voice trembling. She didn't move. The scent of lilies was suffocating now, so strong I could taste it. I took a step closer, and she slowly turned to face me. But it wasn't Amelia. The thing that turned towards me had her face, her eyes, her smile, but they were all wrong, twisted, and unnatural. Her eyes were too dark, too hollow, her smile too wide, stretching unnaturally across her face. The air around her seemed to ripple, like heat waves on a summer day, distorting the space between us. My stomach churned with a primal fear, a deep, instinctual terror that screamed at me to run, but I was frozen in place. Then, in a voice that was almost Amelia's, but not quite, she spoke, "Why did you leave me?" The words echoed in my mind, bringing with them a flood of memories, of our life together, of her final days, and of the scent of lilies that now felt like a noose tightening around my throat. My breath caught in my throat as the twisted figure of Amelia continued to stare at me, her smile stretching wider, impossibly so. Her eyes, once full of life and warmth, were now dark voids, absorbing the light in the room. The scent of lilies was overpowering, a sickly sweet perfume that clung to my senses and wrapped around my thoughts like a fog. I wanted to scream, to flee, but my legs refused to move, rooted to the spot by a terror that felt like it was growing inside me, feeding off my fear. I didn't leave you," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. It felt absurd to speak to this thing, to try to reason with it, but my mind clung desperately to any hope that this was some cruel trick of my imagination. But as she, or it, began to move closer, I knew this was no mere illusion. The closer she came, the more distorted her features became, her face warping into a grotesque mockery of Amelia's once beautiful countenance. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but the room itself seemed to conspire against me, closing in, the walls pressing down as if to trap me with this nightmare. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic, as the thing that wore my wife's face drew nearer. Her footsteps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing in the suffocating silence. I could smell her now, not just the lilies, but something darker, something decayed and foul beneath the floral sweetness. "Why did you abandon me?" she asked again, her voice reverberating through the room. It was like Amelia's voice, but distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. I could see her eyes now, deep pits of darkness, as if nothing human resided there anymore. My mind raced, trying to grasp onto anything that made sense, but there was nothing to hold on to. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. This wasn't Amelia, and whatever it was, it wanted me to suffer. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I turned and bolted from the kitchen, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste. I could hear the thing behind me, its movements unnatural, a shuffling that seemed to echo from all directions at once. My vision blurred with tears of fear as I ran through the house, desperate to escape, but the scent of lilies was everywhere, thick and choking, filling my lungs until I felt like I was drowning in it. I made it to the front door, my fingers fumbling with the lock in my panic. Finally, the door swung open, and I threw myself outside, gasping for the crisp night air. I ran until my lungs burned, not daring to look back, driven by an instinctive terror that there was something monstrous just behind me. When I finally dared to stop, I found myself standing in the middle of the street, under the cold gaze of the streetlights. My heart pounded in my chest as I bent over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. For a moment, there was only silence, the world around me eerily still. I dared to believe I had escaped, that whatever had taken Amelia's form was trapped inside the house. But then, faint and chilling, I smelled it again, the scent of lilies. It was faint at first, just a whisper in the air, but it grew stronger, closer. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach, and saw the impossible. The thing stood at the end of the street, its form shifting in the darkness, the grotesque mockery of my wife's face illuminated by the pale light. It was coming for me, slowly but surely, and I knew with sickening certainty that there was no escaping it. I could feel the bile rise in my throat as I stumbled back, my mind fracturing under the weight of the horror before me. I had lost Amelia once, and now it seemed I was about to lose myself as well. I staggered backward, the ground beneath me tilting as if the world itself were rejecting my presence. The scent of lilies was all around me now, stronger than ever, and I felt it seeping into my skin, into my mind, like a poison. The thing wearing Amelia's face continued its slow advance, every step deliberate, as if savoring the fear that radiated from me. My thoughts scrambled for some way out, some escape from this nightmare, but every option seemed to collapse under the crushing weight of terror. "Please, leave me alone," I shouted, my voice hoarse with desperation. But the thing just smiled, a cruel imitation of the warmth that had once graced Amelia's lips. It was so close now that I could see every twisted detail of its face, Amelia's face, but wrong, horribly wrong. The eyes were too black, the skin too pale, and the smell was no longer just lilies. There was something rotten underneath it, a stench of decay that made my stomach turn. "Why did you leave me?" it asked again, its voice dripping with malice, each word like a needle pricking at my sanity. "Why did you let me die?" The accusation in its tone cut through me, raw and unforgiving. Memories of Amelia's final days flooded back, the helplessness, the grief, the unbearable pain of watching the woman I loved slip away. I had done everything I could, hadn't I? I had been there, by her side until the very end. But now, faced with this twisted specter, doubt gnawed at my soul. I didn't let you die," I cried out, my voice cracking. "You were sick, there was nothing I could do." But even as I said the words, they felt hollow. Guilt, that ever-present shadow, surged up within me, feeding the darkness that was closing in. What if there had been something more I could have done? What if, in some small way, I had failed her? The thing seemed to feed on my self-doubt, growing stronger, its form solidifying, becoming more real. And then, as if in answer to my unspoken fears, the thing spoke again, its voice shifting, becoming something darker, something that wasn't Amelia at all. "You did nothing," it hissed, the smile vanishing from its face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You let her die. You let me in." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My knees buckled, and I fell to the ground, my hands scraping against the rough pavement. Let it in? My mind reeled as the meaning behind the words sank in. This thing, this entity, wasn't Amelia, never had been. It was something else, something ancient and malevolent, that had found a way into my life through the cracks in my grief. It had used Amelia's death, my sorrow, my guilt, to worm its way into my soul, feeding on the darkness I had tried so hard to keep at bay. I had let it in, unknowingly, by clinging to the scent of lilies, by refusing to let go of my dead wife. As this realization took hold, the thing stopped its advance, its twisted features contorting with rage. "You know now," it spat, the voice no longer resembling Amelia's in the slightest. It was deep, guttural, full of an ancient fury that chilled me to my core. "But it's too late. You belong to me." The world around me darkened, the streetlights flickering out one by one, swallowed by the encroaching void. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness closed in, the last vestiges of light snuffed out by the overwhelming stench of lilies, now a sickening, rotting odor that filled my lungs and suffocated my thoughts. The thing loomed over me, its face inches from mine, the empty blackness of its eyes reflecting my own terrified expression. There was no escape, no waking up from this nightmare. I was trapped in the dark, with only the scent of lilies and the thing that wore my wife's face for company. And as the last sliver of light disappeared, I realized with a cold, dawning horror that this was where I was meant to be all along, lost in the darkness, forever haunted by the memory of what I had lost, and what I had let in. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Dark Lullaby. The first time I heard the lullaby, I was barely 5 years old. My grandmother would hum it softly as she cradled me to sleep, her voice a gentle murmur against the backdrop of night. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, something ancient that seemed to echo through the ages, its words lilting and mysterious. I never thought much of it then, just a sweet song that promised safety and dreams. But now, as I cradle my own child in my arms, those same notes bring with them a chill that I can't shake. My daughter, Lily, has always been difficult to settle at night. The usual lullabies, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and Rockabye Baby, would do little to soothe her cries. In a moment of desperation, I found myself humming that old song my grandmother used to sing. Instantly, Lily's wails ceased, her tiny body relaxing as if wrapped in the very arms of sleep itself. I felt a rush of relief, grateful for whatever magic lay within that melody. Night after night, it became our routine. She would fall asleep almost immediately, and I would place her gently in her crib, watching as her breathing slowed to the rhythmic rise and fall of peaceful slumber. It was only by chance that I discovered the dark history behind the lullaby. I had been sorting through my grandmother's old belongings, an assortment of dusty books and yellowed photographs, when I stumbled upon a tattered leather-bound journal. It had belonged to her, filled with delicate script in a language I didn't understand. The edges of the pages were worn, the ink faded in places, but one word stood out clearly among the rest: lullaby. My heart skipped a beat. Curious, I traced the unfamiliar symbols, copying them down before searching for a translation. It wasn't until I found an old occult reference that I realized what I had unearthed. The song wasn't just a lullaby, it was a chant, an ancient invocation used in exorcisms to bind and banish malevolent spirits. My breath caught in my throat as I read the chilling description. The words, the very same ones I had sung to my daughter, were meant to protect against evil. But they also held power, a power that could summon as easily as it could repel. I felt the blood drain from my face as the realization sank in. What had I been inviting into our home each night? I had always dismissed the strange occurrences, the odd creaks in the floorboards, the flickering lights, the sudden drafts of cold air, as products of an old house. But now, I wasn't so sure. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sing the lullaby. I laid Lily in her crib, her eyes wide and unblinking as she fought sleep. She fussed and cried, her tiny hands reaching out, grasping at the air as if searching for something. I tried singing another song, but nothing worked. The minutes ticked by, her cries growing more frantic, more desperate. Finally, in a moment of weakness, I gave in. The familiar melody escaped my lips, and within moments, Lily was quiet, her eyes fluttering shut as she drifted into sleep. But something was different this time. As I stood over her crib, I felt a presence in the room, something watching from the shadows just beyond the reach of the nightlight's glow. The air grew heavy, thick with a sense of unease. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind, warnings I had long since forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood. The lullaby was more than just a song, it was a door, and I had been opening it night after night, without understanding what lay on the other side. I could feel it now, the darkness pressing in around us, a malevolent force stirring just out of sight. It was there, waiting, patient and hungry. And as I turned to leave the room, a soft whisper brushed against my ear, barely audible but unmistakable in its intent. "We're coming," it said. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as shadows twisted and danced in the corners of the room. The air was thick with tension, a suffocating silence that seemed to amplify every creak and groan of the old house. My mind raced, replaying the events of the evening, the sinister whisper that had brushed against my ear. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong, that the lullaby had done more than just soothe my daughter to sleep. It had invited something into our lives, something dark and ancient that I had no idea how to stop. I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head, just the result of an overactive imagination fueled by the strange journal I had found. But deep down, I knew better. There was a presence in the house, something lurking just out of sight, and it was growing stronger with each passing night. The thought of it terrified me, but I couldn't bring myself to leave Lily alone. What if it tried to harm her while she slept? I couldn't take that risk. I had to protect her, even if it meant facing whatever horror the lullaby had summoned. The next morning, I decided to call my mother. She had always been close to my grandmother, more so than I had ever been, and I hoped she might have some insight into the strange events that had begun to unfold. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked her about the lullaby, about any stories my grandmother might have shared about its origins. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a hesitation that made my heart race. "I was hoping you'd never ask about that song," my mother finally said, her voice heavy with a weariness that I had never heard before. "Your grandmother used to say it was a gift, a way to protect us from the things that go bump in the night. But she also warned that it was not to be used lightly. It's an old chant, older than any of us, and it has a power that we don't fully understand. She told me never to sing it unless there was no other choice. I never wanted to believe in that sort of thing, so I ignored her warnings. But now, I think you should stop." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to press for more information, to ask her what exactly the lullaby was supposed to protect us from, but I could hear the fear in her voice, the urgency to end the conversation. She promised to call me back later, after she had gathered her thoughts, but deep down I knew she wouldn't. She was too scared, just like I was. As the day wore on, the atmosphere in the house grew more oppressive. Lily seemed agitated, fussing and crying in a way she hadn't since I first began singing the lullaby. I tried everything to calm her, but nothing worked. Finally, as dusk began to settle, I felt that familiar pull, the urge to sing the cursed song just to bring her some peace. But I couldn't do it. Not after what my mother had said. Instead, I wrapped Lily in her blanket and held her close, whispering comforting words as I rocked her gently. That's when I heard it, a faint humming, just on the edge of hearing, like someone singing under their breath. It was the lullaby, the very same melody I had sworn not to sing, but it wasn't coming from me. My blood ran cold as I realized the sound was coming from Lily's nursery. Slowly, I made my way toward the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, the humming grew louder, filling the small space with its eerie resonance. The room was dark, the only light coming from the small nightlight plugged into the wall. But even in the dim light, I could see that the crib was empty. My breath caught in my throat as panic surged through me. I rushed to the crib, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the switch to the overhead light. The room was instantly flooded with light, revealing the empty space where Lily should have been. I felt a scream rise in my throat, but it died there as I heard the soft humming again, closer this time, almost right beside me. I spun around, my eyes wide with terror, but there was no one there. The room was empty, yet the humming continued, louder and more insistent, filling my ears until I thought I would go mad. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the humming stopped, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. The only sound was my own ragged breathing, punctuated by the soft creak of the floorboards as I took a hesitant step back. Then, from the corner of the room, a shadow began to move, detaching itself from the wall and taking form. My heart nearly stopped as I watched it take shape, a tall, thin figure with hollow eyes and a mouth that stretched too wide, its lips twisted into a grotesque smile. It opened its mouth, and the lullaby poured out, not in a whisper, but in a voice that echoed with the weight of centuries. "Sleep, my child," it sang, its voice a dark, malevolent mockery of the lullaby that had once comforted me. "Sleep, and let the darkness take you." I staggered backward, nearly tripping over my own feet as the shadowy figure loomed before me, its ghastly smile growing wider with each word of the lullaby. My mind screamed for me to run, to grab Lily and flee from the house, but my body was frozen in place, paralyzed by the sight of this thing that had no right to exist in the world I knew. The lullaby dripped from its mouth like poison, each note twisting the air into something thick and suffocating. I clutched Lily tighter to my chest, her small body trembling as if she could sense the evil that had invaded her sanctuary. "Please," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was begging, my grandmother, the creature, or some higher power I had long since lost faith in. "Leave us alone." The figure tilted its head, the grotesque smile never wavering, as if amused by my plea. It stepped closer, its movements unnaturally fluid, as if it were gliding rather than walking. The shadows seemed to cling to it, darkening the room until the only light was the faint glow from the nightlight, casting long, twisted shapes across the walls. The air grew colder with each step it took, and I could feel a deep, primal fear rising in my chest, the kind of terror that belongs to children when the lights go out, and the world outside their beds becomes a place of monsters. And then, just as it seemed the figure would reach out and touch me, it stopped. The lullaby cut off mid-verse, leaving a gaping silence in its wake. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, the figure simply stood there, its empty eyes fixed on mine, as if considering something. Then, without warning, it dissolved back into the shadows, retreating into the corners of the room where the light couldn't reach. But even as it disappeared, the room didn't return to normal. The darkness that had gathered in its wake remained, a lingering presence that felt as though it was waiting for something. With trembling hands, I reached for the crib, gently laying Lily down. Her eyes were wide open, staring up at me with an intensity that made my heart ache. She was too young to speak, but I could see the fear in her eyes, a fear that mirrored my own. I didn't know how to comfort her, how to make her feel safe when I myself was terrified beyond belief. The only thing I could think to do was hum, not the lullaby, but a different tune, something simple and familiar, in the hopes that it would soothe us both. But the melody caught in my throat, replaced by the memory of the figure's haunting song. I turned on every light in the house, refusing to let the darkness take hold again. The rest of the night passed in a blur of restless pacing and desperate attempts to reach my mother, but each call went straight to voicemail. I left message after message, my voice growing more frantic with each one, until I finally gave up and let the phone fall from my trembling hands. I knew I couldn't stay here. Not after what I had seen. But where could I go? And more importantly, would it follow us wherever we went? By dawn, I had made up my mind. I packed a small bag for Lily and grabbed my grandmother's journal, hoping that somewhere within its pages, I would find a clue on how to banish the creature for good. I wasn't sure where I was going, but staying in the house was no longer an option. The shadow had retreated, but I could feel its presence still, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to return. I was about to step out the door when the phone rang, startling me so badly I nearly dropped Lily. My heart pounded as I reached for it, a flicker of hope sparking in my chest that it might be my mother, finally calling back with the answers I so desperately needed. But when I answered, there was nothing but silence on the other end, a heavy, oppressive silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Is that you?" For a long moment, there was no response. Then, just as I was about to hang up, I heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible over the static. It was the lullaby, sung in a voice that was not my mother's, not mine, and not even human. My blood ran cold as the voice continued, its words wrapping around me like a vice, squeezing the breath from my lungs. "Don't leave," the voice hissed, the lullaby warping into something sinister and malevolent. "You can't run from us." I dropped the phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably as the words echoed in my mind. The figure's message was clear, it didn't matter where I went. It would follow. It was already inside, and there was no escaping it. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.